Okay, so I also want to mention a structure that we kind of refer to sort of collectively as the diencephalon. This is the hypothalamus, which we described and discussed already as being critical for maintaining the internal milieu, and also the thalamus. And I want to talk a little bit about the thalamus now. But also the pineal gland is often included as part of this neuroanatomical assemblage known as the diencephalon. And so here is our lateral view of the brain. I've removed the cerebellum below. You can sort of see the actual brainstem here. And if I turn it around like this, right, you can see, I've removed one hemisphere over here, right? This is the right hemisphere, and this is the occipital lobe we're looking at over here. So this is a dorsal view of the brainstem. So that means you can see the bumps, right? You can see the superior colliculi, which are critically important for visual orienting. The inferior colliculi, which we're going to learn, are critically important for auditory processing, part of the auditory pathway. And the pineal gland should be right there in the middle, right? And I'm going to remove this, hemisphere as well, if I can anyway. These things are pretty tough, actually. Put this on top of here. Okay, and so now you got this structure. Did you know this was in your head? This is a pretty alien-looking structure. So this is the dorsal surface of the brainstem. Here's the medulla. Here's the pons, and here's the midbrain. At the midbrain level, you can see those bumps, or at least hopefully you can see those bumps. And you can also see this great big kind of rounded structure here. This is the thalamus on the right side, so I've turned this around. So this is the ventral surface now of the brainstem. But here is the right thalamus and the left thalamus. And they're sometimes connected actually by a very thin, set of connections here called the massa intermedia. And what you can also see about this is really, I think, kind of interesting is on the side here, you can see this is part of the insular lobe, which is separated from the thalamus by a thin amount of white matter. But the thalamus is this great big egg-shaped thing here, and it is most definitely gray matter. It's a whole assemblage of different nuclei that initially process incoming sensory information before sending it on to cortex. So these collectively, so there are specific nuclei that are dedicated to receiving sort of the inputs from the eyes, from the optic nerves, for example. They're going to go back and make their first synaptic connection in a specific nucleus in the thalamus. It's actually the lateral geniculate nucleus, the little knee on the side of the thalamus. And then, auditory information is going to work its way up the brainstem, including, with some synaptic connections in the inferior colliculi, but then work its way, to the medial geniculate nucleus before, being projected into the temporal lobe. So the thalamus initially processes incoming sensory information, before sending it on to, the various cortical regions that are going to be doing, additional sort of perceptual processing of that signal. And also there's lots of feedback projections actually from, the from the cortex into the thalamus. So we sometimes talk about these thalamocortical loops or, kinds of connections. So that's the diencephalon. The thalamus transmits information to cortex and also receives a lot of information back. The hypothalamus basic drives, like for food and water, and sexual activity and, all sorts of things. Autonomic nervous system integration, and controls hormone release from the pituitary. It can alter the balance of, autonomic output, and also communicates via the thalamus, right, to the anterior cingulate gyrus cortex in the frontal lobes and can influence our behavior.